Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Intuition Revolution podcast. And today I have the privilege and the honor to have with me Nicola Huelin from Mpower. Nicola, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join you on the podcast, Ange. It's such an honor, and I love this topic. It's such a fascinating and important topic to explore in relation to business. I'm really excited to be here, and as you said, I am the founder of Mpower, which is really all about empowering women in business, particularly mothers, the women who have taken up the challenge of building a successful business they love whilst raising a family they love more than anything, and how they combine those two. I've got 3 businesses actually, but there's a golden thread that runs through all of them, and it's all about empowering people in business. The other brand is empowering women within the corporate space, because not everybody wants to or is meant to become an entrepreneur. And I think it's equally important that women who love their career, as I did for a portion of my life, are empowered to make their impact in the corporate space too. And then I have a third brand, which is specifically about helping coaches, because I got asked more and more, how did you do what you did with Mpower? So I'm really passionate, because I believe coaching and a blend of coaching, mentoring, training really has the power to change the world. So that's kind of the umbrella from which I'm speaking today, I guess.
I love that you actually support women within the workplace as well as entrepreneurs, because I don't know many people who do both. And I can really see where you're coming from with this. I think it's beautiful that you're able to
Thank
cater
you.
for both,
Thank
especially
you.
because I know how well you support women and your style and it's just lovely. So yeah. How long have you been doing what you're doing?
Full time, well, full-time business coaching and mentoring that I do today,
Yeah.
8 coming up 9 years, so quite a long time.
Wow.
But I took that leap of faith, if you like, from the corporate world to becoming an entrepreneur my son's going to turn 18 in May, so about 18 years ago. Was when I transitioned from a career that I absolutely loved, where I started off in marketing and moved into project and program management, then business consultancy by the end of my career. And I loved that career, and it was really right for me at the time. But took that leap of faith to become an entrepreneur about 17 years ago, 18. And it is that leap of faith, really, that I guess
Mm.
was where the start of my intuition story kicked
Ah,
in.
I'm interested in that, but I'm also interested in what led you into the particular coaching style and wanting to work for mums in business. That's what I'd
What a
like to.
great question. Well, um, when I first became an entrepreneur 18 years ago, it wasn't in business coaching and mentoring to begin with. So I had a number of different online and offline businesses as an entrepreneur and business owner. And I really left the corporate world with this craving, this real desire to create more balance and flexibility, as a lot of women do when they leave the corporate world, to be able to better combine my love and passion for business with the absolute love of my family and wanting to
Mm.
be the mum I wanted to be. So that was sort of my personal drive. And when I, the very first business I had, I thought, with my business experience and postgrad qualifications and blah, 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 I thought I would tick a lot of the boxes I'd need as an entrepreneur. And the very first family business, and I say that in inverted commas, was a huge success financially, but it came at a huge financial cost. And within 2 years, although it was financially successful and it all looked great on paper, it led me to a burnout after those
Mm.
first 2 years. And when we sold that business, it was coming out of that experience, which now with hindsight, I look back, and instead of the regret and how bad I felt really for those 2 years where I really felt that I'd sacrificed, really precious years. My kids were still really young. It was those first 2 years. My son was only 4 months old, and it was those first couple of years. But now with hindsight, I look back and I can see that experience was actually the catalyst, if you like, for going on this quest to say to myself, it must be possible to build a successful business and make a great living and have all those financial rewards without having to sacrifice our personal life, our family life, our health, and our emotional well-being in the process. So that led me on to different online and offline businesses. And I'm really proud to say I did figure out the missing ingredients. I did figure out, okay, so that's what it took. That's the stuff they don't teach you in an MBA, or that you don't learn from your experience in the corporate world. Intuition being a part of it, and obviously we'll come to that. And obviously back then, 18 years ago, that this is how old this is going to make me feel, but there was no social media. There was barely internet connections, dial-up AOL and all of that. So I think I felt quite isolated in that journey. It wasn't an established norm or third way, the homemaker swim lane or the career mum swim lane, and this actually you can be an entrepreneur from any age swim lane. And it wasn't so visible back then. And because there was no social media, it wasn't until really about 10 years ago I started to see, thanks to the social media platforms and connect with, this growing movement of women who were choosing to do just that and become their own boss and build their own business, often for the same reasons, balance and flexibility. But in that same breath, I started to hear more and more messages from these women about how much they were struggling with the business stuff, particularly marketing. They're really great at what they do, really passionate, really driven, but really struggling to, well, how do I get clients? I haven't got a clue where to start. And I assumed everybody loved marketing like me, when you just do what you do, and it's like,
Yeah.
really you don't
Oh, a lot of
enjoy
people
the
have a
part?
love-hate relationship with it. More hate than love.
Yeah, the Marmite marketing, you love it or you hate it. So I guess that was where I started to see, actually, there's so many people I can help, because this is stuff I love and I'm passionate about, and I have that expertise. So I had the business know-how, and I had been, as a business consultant, I'd been coaching and mentoring as part of my role, but I'd never been formally trained as a coach, and I wanted to train in deeper coaching skills, because part of what I could see was the big struggle was mindset, confidence, self-belief, imposter syndrome, all these really common challenges that are less to do with the external expertise and know-how, but our inner landscape. So it was about 9 years ago now, I trained in personal transformation coaching with Animas. And when I did that training, part of the discussions we were having with our peers who were training at the same time was, well, who are we going to coach? How do we want to bring these coaching skills to the world? And initially, I knew it was always around supporting women. And initially, I at the time, I was going through some of my own personal struggles around fusion families, bringing together two for want of a better word, previously broken parts of a family and integrating those. It's not plain sailing. And I thought initially it was going to be around that. So I did some exploration, and is it going to be around coaching teenagers? I'd been doing a lot of work supporting my own fusion family teenagers at the time. And I was really seriously exploring that. But then, you have to walk your own talk, and part of successfully marketing what you do is first get really, really connected to your purpose, your paramount purpose above and beyond making money, your vision, what I call inspired intentions, when you really start to connect to what your heart is whispering to you, and also find that sweet spot between all of that stuff and where your personal strengths are. And when I pulled in the personal strengths part and really started to look at, well, what's my backstory? What is this kind of 25 years experience I can bring to the table as part of supporting that purpose? It just became so glaringly obvious, and with what I was hearing at the time through social media about where people were most struggling and where they wanted help. So that was just like a penny dropping moment, and I was like, yeah, okay. And it's interesting, it's thank you for your feedback about liking the sound that I support women, both sides of the fence, I guess I call it. And that had always been clear to me, that was something that felt important from day one. But interestingly, and I tried to do it from day one, I worked under a different brand initially, trying to show actually it's important, whichever swim lane you choose, it's important to have that support and be empowered. But life made it very clear, actually this is where you're meant to start. And so it was more the entrepreneurial women's side. That's where things took off much quicker. That's where I found my flow, my natural flow from day one. And the branding just took on a life of its own, really, in terms of what was resonating with the female entrepreneurs, the mums in business. And it wasn't actually until about 2-3 years ago that then the opportunities to say, hey, remember you always wanted to work both sides of the fence? Well, here's some opportunities for you. So I was approached by global organizations with the question, do you do work in any way helping women with their confidence and making an impact in the corporate one? I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. So that opportunity didn't come back and onto my radar until about a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago.
No, I think it's very important because as well, I remember when joining the entrepreneurial world, there was almost this divide between leaving the corporate, and it was almost like rejecting the corporate. And whenever people do that, I always step back because I don't like camps. I think that there's something about camps that is divisive. And I know a lot of coaches who promote their services as, like, yeah, we're the entrepreneurs and we're better than the people in the corporate. And I can't buy that. I'm sorry. Yeah. I know there's wonderful people everywhere. So
absolutely.
I really appreciate that about you. It's very,
thank you. And hats off to the full-time homemakers. I've done that for a couple of years, and that's a tough gig. That is a tough gig as well. In my TED talk, I mentioned this. I think it's so important to just point out, I think in the Western world, we've very much forgotten the value of the work and the energy and the time and the love that goes into homemaking, and whether we're doing that full time or combining it with something else. And Bidvine in 2017 did this amazing research where they looked at all the things that a full-time homemaker does and said, okay, so if that were to be a salaried role or was income generating, looking at it through an entrepreneurial lens, what would that equate to in monetary terms? Can you guess how much it is a year?
I think you've mentioned it before, but I don't know. Please
80,
enlighten our audience.
yeah, £84,000 a year.
Yeah.
£84,000 a year, which makes sense. They add up all the things that we do and the value that adds. And if you had to pay somebody for it or outsource it. So I think it's really important. And I think, we live in a world where there are so many possibilities and opportunities that beauty is we don't have to stay in one swim lane forever. We
As
can
well.
we
I
can
agree.
shift over time. Life is a very long life these days, thanks to medicine. And what's to say we can't go into entrepreneurship and then take on corporate roles and contracts and then have time out when depending on the stage our family's at. Our kids are only young for so long, and there's this myth that as they turn into preteens and teenagers, they need us less. That's not true.
No, I can vouch for that.
Yeah, they just need us in different ways. So I think any swim lane is important, and valuable, and what's most important is that each woman finds the path and the swim lane that's right for her at that time.
And her own style of swimming, which I'm sure you help with. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so we're a little bit pressed for time today, so we're going to get to the meaty part of the interview. Not that what we've talked about so far is not totally juicy for me, but I want to ask you a quick question. Do you consider yourself intuitive?
I do now. So now I could say yes, but I haven't always.
Okay. And how long ago was that you just owned it, you would say?
Owned it much more recently. I think the first time intuition really showed up in my life for me was when I was 29 years old. And I was at the peak of my business consultancy corporate career. And they had earmarked me to take part in a 6-month, it was called Peak Performance Coaching Program. And it was a group of people to essentially be fast track within the organization. So I felt really honored to be on it. And it was a 6-month program. I just remember the first weekend, first day, first story that the trainer told was about this piece of ribbon. He did an exercise with it, the ribbon of life. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I couldn't articulate at that time why it had hit me so strongly. But I just knew in that moment intuitively, although I wouldn't have used the word intuition, I just knew I had to leave the corporate world at that stage. And even though on paper it made absolutely no sense whatsoever, I'd studied really hard, I'd done postgrad studies, I had experience, I had these opportunities being clearly laid out in front of me in the corporate world. And yet from that one story, I just felt it at a really cellular level. And something was telling me if I want to continue on a track where I can become increasingly, not just become increasingly successful in appearance to others looking in, but feel increasingly successful on the inside, I need to change track. And I couldn't say why. And on paper, it didn't make sense. Lots of people thought I was completely crazy. And I know they did because they told me to my face. Even people were really close to me, like, I don't get it. And I couldn't necessarily justify it or rationalize it. I just knew. But I wouldn't have back then called that intuition, and I followed it. It was one of the most, I call it terror-citing, half exciting, half totally terrifying things I've ever done. It was stepping away. I was the main breadwinner by about 3 times at that stage. So it was a huge risk, I guess, but I didn't feel it as a risk because I just intuitively knew. And that was my first experience of intuition. But it's interesting. What I realized looking back is there'd always been very much two parts of me. So I was 29, very much in the corporate world, love my corporate career. But I guess at about the age of, in my early 20s, I worked for an American boss. And she was amazing, Carolyn Wilson. And she was very spiritual, even though she was in a very kind of senior leadership, corporate role, did her stuff. She had a very spiritual side. And she was the person who, she gifted me a book. It was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Yes.
And she wrote a lovely message in the beginning. And that's all about that, that journey and going full circle and coming back to where we were already, just to discover what we couldn't see at the time. And that one book led me to read another book and another book. And I just devoured all these spiritual books. And so I began to develop two parts, which I think I kept in really separate boxes for a very long time.
I can relate to that so much.
There's like the corporate me who rocks up and does my job. And then there's the spiritual me that was learning and growing. But I never brought that other half into the corporate space. And the only way I can explain really what happened, I guess that story when I was 29, it gave us this space to really, like whole thinking, not just with our head, but because we were away from the corporate hustle and bustle. I think I was able to just kind of, there was less noise and I could tune in and kind of integrate. I integrated those parts of me and I really looked at what I wanted and what was important and started to envisage a future, not just from my, intellectual thinking. I brought that other part of me into that program. And that's when everything shifted. That was the first time I integrated my parts, I guess.
That's a very powerful story of intuition in business, isn't it? Is that the one you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, that was the starting point. And as I said, and it was a bit of a one-off, I think. It created that shift and I went on that entrepreneurial journey. But then I think the error I made at the beginning was going into entrepreneurial business for myself, but still thinking I had that corporate hangover, still thinking I needed to keep both those parts separate to be business, professional and successful in the business world. And I had discovered meditation through yoga. I'd spent a couple of years in the Seychelles and started doing yoga with this amazing yoga teacher, Ruth. And she integrated guided relaxation and meditations, and that really brought it to the fore. So it became more of a regular practice and I really got into meditation. But again, still keeping both parts of me a bit separate, even as an entrepreneur. And I think it wasn't really until a good kind of, let's say 8-9 years ago that I really started integrating it into my entrepreneurial business. And that's when things really started to take off. That's when all the dots connected. And even more so when I wrote my first book, because I think I was doing it, but it's like, it wasn't a daily natural practice, an in the moment ongoing until I wrote my first book. And I remember being offered a publishing deal, and I found out on the Friday, went celebrating all weekend with Graham. Back in the days when we went out places, we went out to Chestnut and drank loads of champagne. I remember waking up on Monday thinking, oh no, I'm not going to swear, but I did say a swear word. Now I've actually got to write the book. And I really struggled because I needed that other half to write the book. I couldn't get going for about 3 months. So I discovered at that point, I was looking, how can I find my my author voice, my stride, my flow. And I discovered Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, started doing morning pages, which for anybody who doesn't know about that, it's a free writing, like a journaling technique. We just write three pages of streams of consciousness every morning. And that was a complete game changer. It just really became the first kind of tool that I could use to really
tune in
and open up that intuitive channel on a daily basis. So that meditation plus morning pages, which I still do to this day, it just became a real daily game changer for me.
So normally I would ask you to tell where people can find you, but you're a bit of a celebrity, aren't you? So it's very easy to find you. First, you're an author of a book that made the list of the 10 top business books written by women.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that, because I used to call it the bloody book when I was writing it. It took me a year to write it, and it was quite a process. I don't call it the bloody book anymore. It's there. The invisible revolution is now visible. But yeah, I was really proud of that
powerful book.
Recognition.
Yeah. And, so people can find you on the Mpower website, and we'll have all the details in the show notes. So I would like to ask you one more question that I ask all my guests, because I think it's a very juicy one, is what would you say to someone who's afraid to use their intuition in business?
I just say it's a complete game changer, both in the entrepreneurial world and the corporate world as well. The women's impact programs that I run in the corporate world, we talk about intuition and using our head, heart, and gut brain, and integrating the power of all three. And I'd say it's a real game changer. And I think that the key is learning to trust it. Learning to trust it, because sometimes things don't make sense on paper. They don't make sense to our rational brain. And I just know from experience, whenever I've trusted that quieter, softer whisper of an intuition inspired idea or direction or next step, it has always led to amazing things. And when I look back, hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's in those moments when I haven't trusted my intuition. I've gone against that feeling of it doesn't feel right. And now if something doesn't feel right, even if I can't explain why, I will trust that and give the power to that. And to become, it's so powerful and freeing to become internally referenced in that way.
Absolutely. And not to have to justify or try to rationalize it, as long as you know how to make a distinction between your intuition and all the rest of the things that can happen in your mind and body. So yes, thank you
and I think
so
that's
much.
key, isn't it? It's learning to allow or connect to that. It's learning to identify it, recognize it, and then it's learning to trust it. And really that comes through, guidance and support, but then practice. It's through actually doing it and experiencing it that we learn to really tap into harness the power of that.
I could talk to you for hours, but we need to finish this interview for today. I'd love to have you on the show again at some point, but I want to thank you so much for your wisdom, for your story. You're such an inspiring lady. And
well, thank you for having me on the show. And the work you do is incredible, not just at an individual level, but this movement of awareness and education of the power of intuition in the world of business is so important. So thank you for allowing me to come on and be part of that.
Thank you. And I appreciate you seeing that and encouraging me, because at this point, it's more of it's an intuition that I have that it's so needed. So it's good to have a validation. And I believe that sharing everybody's stories from women who don't consider themselves intuitive or didn't, but followed through and nevertheless, and then learned, I'm hoping it's going to be incredibly inspiring for people who are still at the start of that journey, when it feels uncomfortable and they're afraid of being, labeled irrational or all that sort of thing. So thank you so much for your mentoring in that respect with your story. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners for coming and listening to this episode. You will have all the details to contact Nicola in the show notes, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye for now.